Welcome to Data Skeptic Time Series.
This is Data Skeptic Time Series, the podcast about how to predict the future based on historical sequential data. Episode number. During this season, we've covered a variety of different applications of time series problems and industry use cases for time series forecasting, or as the intro says, how to predict the future given historical data. Today we look beyond the machine learning techniques and hear about the ability of psychics to predict the future. I sit down for a chat with Richard Saunders about the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project. This is the largest known empirical study of psychic predictions, and I'm eager to hear what story that data tells us about their accuracy. Richard, welcome to the Data Skeptic Podcast.
Great to be with you.
Well, I asked you on today to talk about the Great Australian Prediction Project. For listeners that might not have heard of it yet, can you give us the high level? What is the project all about?
Well, the project really started, 12 years ago, around 12 years ago, when I was looking at various psychic predictions just in passing, because every year here in Australia, and I'm sure all around the world, psychics turn up in December and January, mostly, and give their predictions for the coming year. And it's been a long thing that we are skeptical of psychics in general, so we would be skeptical of psychic predictions. And every now and then I noticed that groups around the world would maybe collect a year's worth of interesting predictions, and it would make a small press story. The Bay Area Skeptics did this in the 90s. And so I started collecting these, and I collected more, and I collected more. And in 2010, I gave a talk about it at the amazing meeting here in Sydney, James Randi Educational Foundation and Australian Skeptics Convention in 2010. And it made for a good presentation. James Randi was quite interested and prompted me to keep going with this sort of research. And I really went crazy, I guess. I started collecting everything I possibly could find, dating back to the year 2000. And that led to me going to libraries, state libraries here in Sydney, state library in Victoria, looking through every issue of certain tabloid magazines where they make a lot of predictions, scanning the internet, raiding archives, and ultimately, after 12 years of work, I ended up with 3,811 psychic predictions.
And why go to such a length? I guess you could just check Twitter and say that's enough. Was it a goal to really be a completionist project and to capture all the predictions?
Well, you know how these things, they sort of take on a life of their own. Once I started collecting some and I had 100 and 200, and I thought, oh, here's another archive. I can raid this and get more. And I just kept going. And the more I kept going, the more I thought to myself, the more I collect, the better from a statistical point of view, the more satisfactory it would be. And it became a hobby, then became an obsession. From time to time, I'd stop and go and stop and go. And the more I saw the database growing, the more I wanted to keep it growing. And eventually I thought the year 2017 was around the corner. And I thought, that's it. 2017 will be the cutoff point, and I can have 17 years or something worth of predictions. But of course, at the end of 2017, I had thousands of predictions, but I hadn't properly analyzed them all. So I just kept collecting. Finally, I did make the hard and firm decision that I would have to stop collecting and analyzing at a range because, I couldn't just leave it open-ended. I needed to produce a report. So 2020 seemed the appropriate date. So I then decided that's it. So every possible prediction I can gather, published prediction from the years 2000 to the years 2020. And that's why I ended up with 3,811. But I guess one of the biggest parts of the project was simply going through and assessing each and every one of those thousands of predictions.
Yes, you've got a problem in data science we call unstructured data. Maybe you know who created the prediction and the date they created it, but other than that, you've just kind of got a paragraph or maybe several paragraphs. What can you do to categorize or classify that a bit more?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's of course something that didn't occur to me when I started this. I mean, a lot of things didn't occur to me when I started this. I think that the general perception out there is people would say, well, if you have a group of predictions, psychic predictions, you can easily just say, well, did they happen or did they not? Well, yes, sometimes. Sometimes. A lot of the predictions are a very iffy or vague or open to interpretation. Some of them were simply so vague and wishy-washy that we couldn't pin them down. Most of them we could relatively easily categorize. I mean, for example, if there's a prediction made about, which was very common in Australia over the last 20 years, the royal family, then the category was easy. The category was royalty. That's fine, or royals. Then each prediction also has another column in the database, which is the main subject. So, for example, if the prediction is about Queen Elizabeth II, the topic would be royals and the main subject would be Queen Elizabeth II. So every prediction we looked at and thought, well, what's the topic? Is it celebrities? Is it movie stars? Okay, if it's celebrities, then it goes under celebrities. And what's the prediction about? Oh, it's about Liz Hurley, for example. Okay. Then the main subject is Liz Hurley. And sometimes that was open to debate. I mean, predictions about local councils with certain councillors doing things, or weather predictions, how do we exactly put that? Some of the main topics of predictions, the biggest topic is celebrities. By far in the database, most predictions are about celebrities. Politics is a huge number of predictions about politics. Will this party win? Will the Prime Minister win? Lots of predictions about American politics. Sport is another big topic, and we can break that down. Sport, well, that includes football games, or in Australia, cricket matches, or soccer, or whatever it happens to be. So most of the time it was more or less obvious what the topic and the subject should be, but sometimes that was open to debate, like a lot of the predictions.
Is there a common persona of the psychics making these predictions? Is this a professional thing they're doing, or a side project? What do you see consistent across the people in the database?
What I see are people who are usually probably on some sort of retainer or contract or deal with magazines that will publish weekly predictions. Some of them are just known psychics in our society who will appear on television, primarily because the producers of the TV shows know that when they wheel these people in, they can get a 5-minute segment. And these people are known quantities. In other words, they won't sit on camera and clam up or not perform well. They'll come on and they're personable, they're chatty, they'll make interesting and funny and way out predictions, and that's all the producers want. So they don't really care if the predictions are right or wrong. That's irrelevant, as long as the people can perform, or they can write. You know, people can just churn out something about Nicole Kidman or Donald Trump or something. Oh, I see this happening, I see this happening. So I think most of them, or certainly a lot of them anyway, in some sense or some regard or another, do make some sort of living out of being a psychic, and this is just one of the strings to their bow.
Could one of these people maybe claim they're no different from a financial analyst that's just kind of using their intuition and analysis to look at the future? Or are they all really invoking something supernatural?
Yeah, the ones in our list, they are claiming they're using dreams or interpretations or mystical voices or what the stars happen to say, or their psychic insights or messages from ghosts or visions, or, you name it. Like, what does the tarot card say? They're not claiming that, this is my educated guess for sensing the breeze here and looking at the way the world is going and the political party is looking. And we can do that. And people do that all around the world. Everybody does it probably from time to time. I do it. I think this will happen. Now, that's not the claim. The claim is that information of future events is ultimately being sent backwards in time. They're perceiving this, and they're saying, I see this happening because the information has been sent backwards in time to me. They don't put it in those words, but that ultimately is the claim.
And I don't imagine you can know what's in their mind or in their heart of hearts, but do you have a sense, are these people pious frauds, genuine frauds, just mistaken? What are people actually thinking who make these sorts of predictions?
Well, my answer to all that is yes, all of the above. Undoubtedly, there are some in the mix, and we've got 207 in the database, 200 people who claim psychic powers. There are some there who just know it's a gig. It's a job, it's just what they churn out, and they know they're on safe ground because even if they're the subject of a huge investigation and in, statistics, who cares? It won't matter to their business. They'll just keep going. They're bulletproof in a sense. But yes, mixed up amongst those, I'd say probably the majority are actually truly believe they have mystical powers and insights, and they'll sit down and they'll write lots and lots and lots and lots of predictions. And when some come true, which has to happen, if you write lots of predictions, some have to come true. You can't write every one not coming true, just sheer chance. They will say, oh, look at that. I got this right. I got this right. I got this right. It's like a feedback loop, and it reinforces their own belief. And we discovered in our research that some of them are very generous, very forgiving, and very understanding of their predictions, to the extent that one psychic predicted that by now we would have anti-gravity devices. And she regarded that as a correct prediction when she was marking her own homework, so to speak. So, to get back to your original question, there's a huge mixture ranging from the people who absolutely know it's just something to do and they don't really see the future, all the way to the people who sincerely and really do believe that they have mystical powers and insights.
Yeah, if you remember the hits and forget the misses, I could see where I might think that I've got some insight, just focusing on those that I got. But luckily with the database, we can look at that from a wider lens. On average, I don't know if you can look at this by a percentage accurate or something like that, but can we measure the degree to which psychics do have some ability to predict the future?
We can. And I'll just pull up, and I've got the database in front of me now, and it's very handy. And the way I can crunch the numbers on this database just gets insane. It's just crazy. So overall, each prediction ended up being categorized, when we look at the verdict, in several different ways. It was either wrong, just wrong. Someone, say, predicted that Donald Trump would win the last presidential election, and he didn't, obviously. Well, that's a wrong prediction. And many predictions in the database, we could simply say, that didn't happen. She did not have 3 children. They did not marry. The city was not destroyed by a volcano. You name it. And that accounts for 53.4% of the database. The verdict, in our opinion, was simply wrong. And there wasn't too much arguing or debate about a lot of these. They were simply a matter of historical fact. The event predicted simply did not turn out. However, of the pie, on the pie chart, is we have predictions categorized as too vague, and that takes up 18.3%. Now, these are the predictions that we read and read again and read again. I said, well, is this right? Is this wrong? Did this happen? We can't tell. A lot of them have to do with affairs of the heart. They might say this actor or actress is feeling lonely at the moment, but who knows, love could be around the corner, and if they concentrate, they may. It's just what we ended up calling waffle. And we couldn't mark it wrong, we couldn't mark it incorrect, we couldn't mark it correct. So it's just vague and open to interpretation. Another slice of the pie is what we call expected, and that takes up about 15.2% of the database. These are predictions, and I kid you not, along the lines of, I foresee in the coming year there will be earthquakes in California. Now, or predictions that closely followed economic trends. So if the economic trend was interest rates are falling, and they predicted interest rates are falling, well, yes, that's because that's what's happening at the moment. Even predictions that they knew, for example, sometimes may even predict a pregnancy when the pregnancy had already been announced, and so on. So that's 15.2. And a tiny slice, only a little over 2%, was unknown. And we could not find out whether the event happened or didn't happen or anything like that. It's only a very small percentage in the database. For example, there was a prediction made one year that Nicole Kidman would undergo some minor surgery. Now, we looked and looked and looked, and there was nothing reported anywhere. But of course, she could have. I mean, people have minor surgery from time to time. It's no big deal. It might be a day thing. It might be a removal of something or not. But we could not nail it down. We couldn't find out. So a tiny percentage of predictions remain in the unknown column. But probably the most important slice of our statistical pie, the predictions that we considered to be correct. Did they predict something that wasn't expected, wasn't too vague, and it happened, it came to pass, it really did happen? Yes. Nailed it, okay, tick, correct. Ultimately, they came to a roughly 11%. Now, if you think that these people, many of these people claim mystical insights and make money out of this, and that they set themselves apart from you and I and the rest of the society by claiming to have special powers, to be only collectively 11% correct is what we consider to be absolutely in line with just guessing and random chance and what people in the street could probably normally expect to get if they were just making 100 predictions every year and some would come true. So from that analysis of the general verdicts in the database, we've drawn the conclusion that there is no reason to invoke any mystical or paranormal explanation because there's no evidence that any of those mystical or paranormal things is even happening. The evidence suggests strongly that these people are like you and I and can make lots of guesses, and sometimes those guesses come true.
Within that 11%, can you analyze it in terms of some sort of likelihood? Like, okay, if I predicted Donald Trump would be elected, I'd be wrong, but I could just have, a 50-50 picked Joe Biden and been correct.
There is a subsection of that. And now we've got all the stats and, everything in the database. I could, what's the term? Milk it? Milk the database? What's the term you use? Squeeze more data out of it. There are a percentage, which I don't have in a separate category, but which I could do, which would mean a bit more work, of course, where indeed, you're right. If there are two people heading for an election, as in the case of the US presidential election, and that someone's predicting one or the other, that is a 50-50. We see this mostly in the database when it comes to sporting events. Two teams coming up to the final of the competition, and psychics like to predict the day before or in the week leading up to the big football finals here in Australia, and I'm sure it's in the United States, what team will win. Well, ultimately, that's just a 50-50 call. And yes, there are quite a few predictions in the database which ultimately are a 50-50 call. It was an interesting process, and it could bear some further examination because there are other predictions in the database to do with sport, which were made at the beginning of the sporting competition. For example, one prediction, and I made this prediction myself. This is one I made myself at the beginning of the sporting competition here in Australia. Out of 17 or 18 teams, I predicted one of them, the Cowboys, a football team, would be in the grand final, would play the final game. Now, that was a 1 in 19, 1 in 20 shot, for example. That's correct. I was actually correct. I mean, I just guessed it at random, but I was correct. So that's marked correct. But people guessing a 50-50 shot is also marked correct. So in the future, it may be an idea to break that down even more. I mean, after 12 years, I need a break from the whole project in general. But that's one of the interesting aspects that people don't think about. So someone could just have a run of luck. It's a toss of a coin, and we all know that people can toss a coin and get 3, 4, 5, 6 heads in a row. So if they were to do that with a sporting match between two teams 5, 6, 7 times in a row, which is not out of the realms of possibility, then they can run around saying, look, what an amazing, accurate psychic I am.
If you were to take a really generous interpretation and try and steelman one of these psychics, is there anybody who did a little better or did have a prediction that came true that was kind of surprising at first glance?
One of the interesting aspects of this is that we were really struggling to look for examples we could give to the press or whatever of an amazing prediction that came true. And we really didn't find any. The ones that came true mostly are of a relatively mundane nature. They might say, I predict storms in this city in April, and there happen to be storms in that city in April. We marked it correct. A lot of them are along those lines. The closest we could find to what we might say, well, that's a pretty interesting long shot. It's a bit iffy because somebody predicted that there would be a terrorist attack in the suburb of Parramatta here in Sydney in a certain year. Now, a young boy, horribly deluded young boy, only 15, filled with vigor, shot and killed a civilian police worker. And it was designated because of the influence he had. That was considered to be a terrorist incident. But the full prediction, when you read it in its entirety, says the psychic was predicting a suicide bomber would strike our capital, which is Canberra, the nation's capital, and also this sort of thing would happen in Parramatta. And we looked at this and looked as well. Ultimately, how can you read that? Ultimately, it's wrong because a suicide bomber did not attack Canberra and a suicide bomber did not attack Parramatta. But a terrorist incident did occur in Parramatta. There was a lot of this debate among the team. And you joined us one day, Carl, for working on this project, so you know what the situation was. I would read out a prediction and the team of 6, 7, 8 people would all independently look and come to a conclusion. Did it happen? Did it not? How do we interpret this? Ultimately, we thought if we mark this wrong, people would look at it and say, well, there was a terrorist attack in Parramatta. It didn't fit the prediction exactly, but so ultimately we decided that part of the prediction we probably have to categorize as correct. But as you recall, there was a lot of discussion And I bring the point again that in many cases, we couldn't just look at a prediction and say, it's right, it's wrong. No, there was, is it right? Is it wrong? How do we interpret this? What were they meaning? Are we fair? Are we not fair? So there was a lot of discussion.
Has there been any, media response? One would think that this low rating for psychics would maybe be an embarrassment to some people or some of these publications.
No. To that second part, to the first part, yes, good media response. I've been interviewed around the country on various radio programs, which is fantastic. And my colleague Tim Mendham here at the Australian Skeptics has also conducted lots of radio interviews. So we've sent out a press release. I've made the point in the official report of the project, which was on the last episode of my podcast, The Skeptic Zone number 689, I think, that it ultimately, we knew it wouldn't make any dent to the psychics themselves or psychics appearing in the media. And we've learnt from long experience that no matter how many times we point out that the psychics don't work or they're wrong or think whatever it is, ultimately it doesn't matter. Because the psychics, by and large, are bulletproof anyway. They're certainly, to their believers, they're bulletproof. The believers don't care, and the believers don't trust us or believe anything we, the skeptics, say anyway. And to the TV and radio and magazines, it's just business. I mean, I'm sure many editors don't care or don't believe that psychics are real. It's irrelevant. Can they write well? Can they fill up columns? Can they give us 5 minutes of TV time? End of story. It doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. So we fully expect psychics to continue in magazines, and they will be on the morning chat shows this month and next month to give their predictions.
Well, I guess someone could look at this and say, it doesn't really matter. Let them make predictions about the royal family and, who cares? What's the harm?
What's the harm? Well, ultimately, James Randi said to me, of course there's harm. Of course there's harm in believing in nonsense ultimately. But we acknowledge that, yes, there's harm. Yes, we should investigate these things. And yes, we should make this public and report our results. We just shouldn't get disappointed if people don't suddenly turn to our side and the radio shows and the TV shows don't drop the psychics. But yeah, ultimately, yes, there's harm. I think, too, you'd have to make a case that a lot of it is regarded as light entertainment. So 5 minutes after these psychics go on the TV shows and make lots of predictions about the coming year, the audience will forget the topic. It's just the next segment on the show, and it was worth a laugh or an interest for 5 minutes, and then it's all forgotten. But it's when some of those people then go to psychics on the understanding that these psychics have a mystic insight, or they'll go to psychics seeking inside financial advice, because some psychics claim to be able to read the stock market months ahead, for example. And then it's like throwing a dart at a dartboard or rolling a dice. So yeah, that's a whole worthy of a book. Just, looking at what's the harm versus is it innocent fun?
Yeah, I'm grateful to see projects like this come out. I don't think the National Institute of Science is going to do a deep dive experimental analysis into psychics because there's very little evidence for it, but someone's got to be watching it and creating some materials for others to find. So I've been really appreciative to watch the project, and congratulations on the delivery.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm reasonably confident, because we spent some time looking, that there's been nothing like the scope of this project ever undertaken ever.
Yeah, I think the most longitudinal data set that's been assembled.
I think it really is. I'm toying with the idea of keeping it open to, add to it every year. But then I think, well, what's the point? I've sort of got enough statistics here, a 20-year period with nearly 4,000 predictions. Surely that says enough. But I hope it will stand the test of time. It will be tweaked, of course. If we discover that we've made an error, we will correct the error. But as I say in the official report, I have every reasonable expectation that even with a margin of error, and even with tweaking and correcting, the ultimate conclusion of the project will remain the same. That is, there is no evidence in the data to suggest that people have a mystical or paranormal or psychic ability to foresee future events.
It's almost too bad. I wish someone could foresee a few future events.
I know what you mean, especially over the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Richard, remind listeners, where can they find the Skeptic Zone every week?
All right, if you want to tune in and hear the Skeptic Zone from Australia, the website is skepticzone.tv. And again, if you listen to episode 689, you can hear the full report, the in-depth report about this whole project. And you can download the full report by visiting skeptics.com.au.
We'll have links to both in the show notes. Richard, thank you so much for coming on Data Skeptic.
My pleasure, and who knows, maybe in 2022 I'll be able to see you once again in sunny California.
That would be fabulous.
That concludes another installment of Data Skeptic Time Series. Thanks to our guest today, Richard Saunders. Myself, Claudia Armbruster, as Associate Producer, Vanessa Bly, Guest Coordinator, and our host, Kyle Polich.